side. Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Interesting time to be talking about leadership. What I would like to say is, if you want to look at successful leadership, look at the leadership shown by this government around issues such as border protection. Under the previous government, let's look at the key thing from a humanitarian perspective.
Order.
Let's look at the key things around border protection that have a humanitarian impact, and that is deaths at sea, that is children in detention. When the Howard government left office, there were no children in detention. When the Rudd and Gillard governments came to office and implemented their policies, what you saw was almost an open-door approach, which has resulted in over 1,000 people dying. So the lack of leadership, the poor quality of leadership, led to people dying, and that lack of leadership led to 1,900 children in detention in July of 2013. Don't forget that figure, Mr Acting Deputy President. Over 1,900 children in detention because of a lack of leadership from those on the opposite side. Under this government, what we have seen, using the same Defence Force, the same departments, the same Coast Watch, we have seen leadership determined, consistent leadership provide the kind of policy direction and consistency and support to those men and women who are serving on Operation Sovereign Borders to actually regain control of our borders. It's not been easy, but it has been done. It's been done safely, and most importantly, it's been done effectively. And because there were the same people in the departments, the same equipment was available, the difference has been leadership. It's been commitment, it's been a consistency and a certainty of purpose that has driven that outcome. And that outcome means that not only have there been cost savings in terms of shutting down detention centres, not having to fly people on charter flights, and we heard the Assistant Minister for Immigration today talk about the fact that unlike the $12 billion cost blowout under the Labor Party, there's been savings in the hundreds of millions of dollars as we've been closing centres and not having to send flights. But importantly, the fact that we have been able to close down those detention centres, regain control of our borders, has meant that we've had the capacity to show leadership on a world stage as the crisis in Syria has been unfolding. People in this Senate will know that I spoke a couple of weeks ago about the Intelligence and Security Committee delegation I went on to the US, UK and France, where we heard brief after brief about the dangers of the situation developing there with the millions of displaced people, both internally and externally, in refugee camps, about the threat to those people, the very real humanitarian threat, as well as the issue of people increasingly starting to move in an uncontrolled manner into Europe. As that's accelerated over the last couple of weeks, on the world stage, what we've seen from this government is true leadership, in that it is not just replacing our existing refugee intake, but this is an additional 12,000 places that have been made available by this government. That is leadership. If you compare that with other nations, it's more than the US. The UK is taking a slightly numerically greater number, but it's over a number of years. If you look at the funding that's being applied, Australia is not only one of the most generous nations in actual dollar terms, but most importantly, unlike some countries who have pledged large amounts but have then not actually paid the money, Australia has made sensible and targeted commitments and followed through. That leadership is making a difference for the people in those camps in Jordan, in Turkey, and for the people who are living in Lebanon, including those who aren't necessarily in camps. We're also seeing leadership in that it's not just a knee-jerk reaction, saying come one, come all. It's looking at the fact that there are people in that conflict, and it's a conflict which is based on sectarian issues. And so you have a large Sunni population and a Shia population who've been in conflict with each other for many years. Sometimes it flares to the surface. But the people who have been consistently oppressed, and if you look at the numbers of the Jewish population, the Christian population, Druze, in that part of the world, it has decreased dramatically over the last decade. And so those people, even if one day there is a peace of some sort that is resolved in that part of the world, where whatever happens with Daesh, whatever happens with the Assad regime, if they can somehow, with their supporters in Russia and Iran and Saudi Arabia and other countries, if they can reach some kind of long-term peace, the issue for these persecuted minorities is that they will still not have a place. It is a documented fact now that Christians are actually the most persecuted religious group in the world, and there's a number of studies that demonstrate that fact. And so it's leadership from this government that says we recognise that everyone, regardless of their creed, is suffering right now, in the short term. But in the medium to long term, who has no options in that part of the world? Who has no medium or long-term future in that part of the world? And so it's leadership from this government that has secured our borders, given us the capacity to take additional people, made the Australian public trusting of a government who can secure their borders, who can then reach out to bring in the most persecuted, the most needy, and give them not only a safe haven in the short term, but the leadership to give them a meaningful settlement program that will give them a future. The leadership to bring communities in Australia, the diaspora of the Orthodox churches and others together to provide the support for these people that when they come here, they can settle in this nation and build a new life for themselves and their children. Long-term leadership is about statesmanship. It's not just the next election. It's having an eye on the next generation. And there's a number of steps this government has taken which shows true long-term leadership.
Thank you, Senator Fawcett.